So I think this is something well worth discussing. And that is the title of the video, as you may be able to see, Membership 2.0. What does it actually mean for the UK to actually rejoin the European Union? And I think it is important we start this conversation now. And we're going to go through an article from the London School of Economics that basically asks that question. What will it mean for the UK to actually rejoin the European Union? And more importantly, what will it actually involve? So let's get down to it. So as I said, London School of Economics, Membership 2.0, what the UK rejoining the EU would involve. Oh, there we go. So what would it take for the UK to rejoin the EU? Anthony Salmon sets out how the UK would have to change and the demands of the European and demands the Union would make. To adopting its opt-outs, the UK would have to start from scratch and accept being a normal member state, and thus make its second EU membership a much more positive and inclusive. With Brexit now imminent, proponents of EU membership are already considering the possibility of the UK rejoining the EU in perhaps 5 or 10 years' time. This prospect raises important political questions which should have to be addressed before the UK took even the first steps towards renewal of membership. Article 50 TUE is famous for its brevity and has been subject to interpretation throughout the process of Brexit, most distinctively by the EU Court of Justice. In its ruling that member states' withdrawal notification can be unilaterally revoked, however, on rejoining it is perfectly clear. A former member state seeking to return must apply under Article 49. This is a normal accession procedure. The UK would have to start from scratch. A letter of application to the Council of Europe, assessment of its candidacy by the European Commission, and a decision made by the Council on whether to make the UK a candidate country. If successful, the subsequent processes and negotiation, ratification and implementation would have to follow. While these steps would be given the flair of the bizarre, given that the UK was a previously member state for 47 years and a powerful member at that, the EU is a legislative organisation bound by its treaties. It would be unwise for the UK to push for a different accession procedure. Instead, it could accelerate the process by ensuring that its laws and policies meet EU standards and by fulfilling all the requirements placed on it expeditiously. The UK would have to demonstrate that it has satisfied the Copenhagen criteria for EU membership and secure agreement from the member states that they had the political will and the EU had the institutional capacity to redeem it. Enlargement requires unanimity. So would any member potentially veto the UK application? In present circumstances, we might imagine countries like Germany, Ireland, Germany, the big country ally, Ireland, most adversely affected by Brexit, the Netherlands and Denmark, like-minded partners, and Poland, many citizens living in the UK, being particularly supportive. France would likely protest in some form, but it might be persuaded in the end if the UK was content with the UK's accession terms. These political dynamics would depend largely upon how the UK conducts itself in the post-Brexit era. The UK's approach to the forthcoming future relationship negotiations, how it treats EU citizens and their families, and its trade, tax, social, environmental and labour regimes in the years ahead would all be factors. The shape of the EU-UK strategic partnership would also be an important consideration. Successful future application for EU membership would have to be precedented upon new political consensus in the UK. The EU would be looking for significant, stable and long-lasting majority public opinion in favour of rejoining. Support for EU membership in the order of 60 to 65% or more for several years would likely be a minimum standard. If the UK were to bid for membership in the absence of such consensus, its application would be undoubtedly rejected. The EU would not voluntarily import an unstable member and a member state or risk another Brexit down the road. The EU would also expect any application to be on the understanding that the UK would be a more normal member state. The UK's major concessions during its first EU membership, the budget rebate, the opt-outs on the euro and Schengen, special justice and home affairs arrangement would not only be on offer. The UK was largely responsible for the opt-out culture, which is still being bemoaned by much of the Brussels establishment. The European Commission is currently seeking to eliminate all budget rebates, following from the UK and other countries have rebates and rebates on rebates for the next multi-annual financial framework. As a full practicing EU member state, the UK would resolve outstanding issues. Its regular membership would allow Ireland to join Schengen and put pressure on Denmark to give up its euro opt-out. The question would also arise of whether the EU might adopt a formal multi-tiered membership structure, and the UK could instead join an outer tier. However, the EU would be unlikely to move in that direction in the foreseeable future, not least due to opposition from those member states which fear being regulated to the outer tiers. During the accession process, the UK would have to undo whatever divergence it had to effect from EU values and standards in the Brexit era and the coverage back with the EU acquis. Depending on its depth, the UK-EU partnership could be the basis for the pre-accession phase, potentially complex by a new accession agreement. If the UK did in future depart from the European Convention on Human Rights, either by leaving the convention or suspending implementing court judgments, the EU would insist it fully reintegrate into that as well. Provided it was successful in rejoining the EU, the UK would have the opportunity to conduct its second EU membership completely differently. It could develop a comprehensive EU strategy, outlining its major political themes and priorities for the EU, and setting out the UK's positive and forward-looking vision for Europe. The UK could not put in place structures to include the devolved political institutions for Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, assuming they all remain in the UK. In its EU decision-making, providing them with genuine access and influence. Renewed EU membership would require the UK to become fully integrated into the core of Europe. In its pursuit, it would have to be grounded in a major UK-level political change and a consensus on the EU. Once the UK experiences the Brexit era with diminished influence and its voice in the world lessened, perhaps the opinion in England and Wales will shift and people will look to regain some of what has been lost. Seeking to rejoin the EU would result from genuine reflection, not expedient self-interest. After the Brexit saga, the UK will owe that much to the EU and to itself. And I think that's fair enough. And later on this week, we're probably going over another article asking and going over those exact same questions. So we'll definitely cover that later. But this is something that we have to start thinking about, because it is more than likely we are going to start seeing divergences. And I'm thinking these divergences we are going to see are not going to be good. Not going to be good at all. But there you go. Like I say, we are now currently run by free market fundamentalists who basically say the government should have absolutely no running in any markets of any way, shape or form. Regulation be damned. And that goes for all regulation, not like specific parts, even the good regulations, which is the most worrying. So, on that, I leave it the question to you of our future EU membership. And as I said, it's only going to take about 5 or 10 years' time. And like I say, all we had to do is let Brexit happen and people can see the absolute mess they did. And as soon as that happens, there will be a changing point and people will want to rejoin.